My name is Elizabeth Montgomery, and what happened at my brother's wedding changed my life forever. Picture this: 200 guests dressed in their finest evening wear, a grand ballroom with crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's homes, and the moment my mother's hand connected with my face so hard that my diamond earring flew across the marble floor like a tiny shooting star.
Why?
Because I refused to hand over the keys to my $2 million penthouse, right there during the reception, in front of everyone we knew. But that was only the beginning. 1 hour later, a man entered the room, a man whose presence would make my mother scream so loudly that security thought there was an emergency happening on the top floor. What he had to say about what he just witnessed would shock every single person in that ballroom and expose a family secret that had been buried for decades beneath layers of designer clothes and country club memberships. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to Olive Revenge Stories, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. Let me take you back to where this all started, not at the wedding, but years earlier, to Connecticut, where it all began. I grew up in the suburbs of Greenwich, in a house that looked absolutely perfect from the outside. White picket fence, manicured lawns that the gardener maintained every single week, a Tesla and a Range Rover in the driveway, and a circular fountain in the front yard that my mother insisted on even though my father thought it was pretentious. My parents, Richard and Catherine Montgomery, were the type of people who cared infinitely more about what the neighbors thought than what was actually happening inside their home. My father was a successful real estate developer, the kind of man who made deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but when he came home, he was silent and distant, more like a ghost moving through our house than an actual parent. My mother came from old money, the kind of wealth that came with a certain level of expectation and superiority. She expected perfection in everything: grades, career choices, appearance, and especially in how we represented the Montgomery name in public. Growing up in that house wasn't just about achieving success. It was about performing success, about making sure everyone knew exactly how successful and accomplished we were. Growing up, it wasn't enough to be good at something. You had to be exceptional. You had to be better than everyone else, and you had to make sure everyone knew about it. I had an older brother, Christopher, who was the golden child in every way that mattered to our parents. He was handsome, charming in that effortless way that made people want to be around him, and most importantly, he was willing to do exactly what our mother wanted. He went to Yale, became a lawyer at a prestigious Manhattan firm, and never questioned our mother's vision for how his life should unfold. My parents adored him. They would brag about him at dinner parties, slip comments about his accomplishments into casual conversations, and treat him with a kind of reverence that made it clear he was the favorite. Then there was my younger sister, Jennifer, who took a completely different path that drove our parents absolutely crazy. She became a teacher, married a public school administrator, and lived a quiet, genuinely happy life upstate in a small town where people actually knew each other's names. She was happy, genuinely happy in a way that didn't require validation from others, and for that reason, my parents treated her with barely concealed disdain. They would make comments about how she was wasting her potential, how she could have done so much more with her education, how she had settled for mediocrity. To them, settling meant not pursuing wealth and status at all costs. I was somewhere in between, caught in the middle like so many middle children. I was the ambitious one, the one who left home at 18 and never looked back, the one who was determined to prove something to my parents, to the world, to myself. I studied business at Duke University, got my MBA from Harvard, and started working at a prestigious investment firm. By the time I turned 30, I had been promoted to Vice President of Development at Montgomery Capital, the family investment firm, and I was overseeing Asia-Pacific expansion that was bringing in hundreds of millions in new revenue. I was making more money than my father, accumulating wealth at a rate that would have made my mother's old money family jealous, and I was doing it all on my own terms. But here's the thing about achieving everything you think you're supposed to achieve when you come from a family like mine: it's never enough. My accomplishments were met with backhanded compliments and subtle criticism. When I got promoted to vice president, my mother asked if I was sure I was ready for that level of responsibility. When I bought my penthouse in Manhattan, my mother said it was a bit much for a single woman, wasn't it? When I traveled to Tokyo for business meetings, my mother worried out loud about whether I was networking with the right kind of people. At 32 years old, I was unmarried, which was apparently a personal failing in her eyes. She would introduce me at events as my daughter Elizabeth, who has such a successful career, with a tone that made it clear she thought my career was somehow compensating for my inability to find a husband. The irony was that I had no desire to get married. I had been in relationships, sure, but I had always chosen my independence over settling down with someone just to satisfy my mother's expectations. This drove her absolutely insane. My father, meanwhile, had become more distant as I succeeded. The more money I made, the less he had to say to me. It was like my success made him uncomfortable, like my independence threatened his sense of paternal authority. He would sit at the dinner table and barely acknowledge me, then turn to Christopher and ask detailed questions about his cases, his promotions, his life. Christopher, for his part, seemed genuinely happy for my success, but he also seemed relieved that my mother's attention had shifted slightly away from him and onto me, where it could be used as a weapon. By the time my brother Christopher decided to marry Rebecca Sterling, I had been working at Montgomery Capital for 8 years and had single-handedly brought in 3 major deals worth over $400 million. I had a penthouse in Manhattan with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. I had a team of 15 people reporting to me. I had everything I thought I wanted, and yet I still felt like a failure in my mother's eyes because I didn't have a husband. The wedding was supposed to be beautiful. Rebecca came from a good family, had the right education, was beautiful in that polished, manufactured way that my mother appreciated. My mother spent 3 months planning this event, and she treated it like it was a demonstration of her superior taste and social standing. The guest list included senators, famous lawyers, successful entrepreneurs, and various members of Connecticut's elite social circles. I was asked to wear a specific designer dress that my mother selected, to have my hair done at a specific salon, to arrive at a specific time. Everything had to be perfect because everything was about appearances. I should have seen the warning signs leading up to the wedding. About a week before the event, my mother called me into her office in the house, the room where she managed the family's social calendar and charitable giving. She was sitting behind her mahogany desk, and there was an expression on her face that I had learned to recognize as dangerous. "Elizabeth," she said, her voice smooth as honey but sharp as a blade, "I need to discuss something important with you." I sat down in the chair across from her, already bracing myself for whatever was coming. "Your father and I have been thinking," she continued, "about the future of Montgomery Capital. Christopher will be taking over eventually, of course, but we have concerns about the liquidity of the company. We have decided that we need to diversify our assets." I nodded, not sure where this was going. "The penthouse," she said simply. "We need you to sign it over to the family trust. It's in your name now, but it's really a Montgomery asset, and we need it for the company." I felt my stomach drop. That penthouse wasn't just an apartment. It was the first thing I had ever purchased entirely with my own money. It was the physical manifestation of my independence, my success, my ability to stand on my own 2 feet. "No," I said clearly. "Absolutely not. I bought that penthouse with money I earned. It's mine." My mother's face went very still. She was not used to hearing the word no from her children. "Elizabeth," she said, her voice dropping into dangerous territory, "this isn't about you being emotional. This is about family responsibility. This is about doing what's right for the Montgomery name." "What's right for the Montgomery name is not stealing from your daughter," I said, standing up. "Because that's what this is. Theft. And I won't participate." I left the room, and I could feel her staring at me as I walked away. I thought the conversation was over. I was incredibly naive. I thought that my clear refusal would be the end of it. But my mother, I would learn, had always been someone who didn't take no for an answer. She simply just waited for the right moment to ask again. That moment came at the wedding reception. Christopher and Rebecca had just finished their first dance. The toasts were being given. The wine was flowing. Everyone was happy and celebratory. And my mother, in her infinite strategic brilliance, decided this was the perfect time to ambush me. My father came to find me standing near the champagne table, and he asked me to step outside. His face was serious, solemn in a way that made me nervous. We went out onto the terrace, and my mother was waiting there, flanked by two of my father's lawyers. "Elizabeth," my mother said, "we thought about what you said last week, and we have decided to be reasonable about this. We are willing to compensate you. We are offering you $500,000 for the penthouse. That's a fair price, and it solves everyone's problem." I looked at her like she had lost her mind. "The penthouse is worth $2 million, I said quietly. "And I don't want to sell it anyway." "This is not a negotiation," my father said, his voice hard. "Your mother is being more than generous. You should accept this offer." "No," I said simply. "I'm going back inside." I turned to walk away, but my mother grabbed my arm. Her fingers dug into my skin, and for a moment, I was shocked by the physical aggression. "You will ruin this family," she hissed. "You will embarrass us." "Is that what you want, Elizabeth? To embarrass the Montgomery name? To make everyone question whether you deserve what you have?" "I don't care what anyone thinks," I said, trying to pull my arm away. "I earned that penthouse. It's mine." That's when she did it. That's when my mother, Catherine Montgomery, reached back and slapped me across the face so hard that my head snapped to the side. The sound was loud enough that some of the guests on the terrace turned to look. I felt my diamond earring come loose from the impact, and I watched in slow motion as it fell to the ground, bouncing once on the marble terrace before rolling away from me. For a moment there was absolute silence. My father stared at my mother in shock. The lawyers looked away, suddenly very interested in their shoes. I touched my cheek, and I could feel that it was already starting to swell. I could taste blood in my mouth from where my teeth had cut into the inside of my cheek. And I made a decision in that moment that would change everything. Instead of crying, instead of running away, I looked at my mother directly in the eye. "You just made a huge mistake," I said quietly. "Not because you hit me, but because you just taught me exactly how low you're willing to go to get what you want. And now I'm going to teach you something about consequences." I walked away from her, back into the ballroom, aware that some of the guests had seen what happened. I could see the whispers starting, could see people's phones coming out to record or take pictures. This was going to spread through their social circles like wildfire. My mother had made her move, and now the game had changed completely. For the next hour, I sat at my table and drank champagne and smiled and acted like nothing was wrong, even as my cheek throbbed and my heart raced with adrenaline and something else, something darker. I was planning. I was thinking. I was remembering every conversation, every slight, every moment my mother had made me feel like I wasn't good enough. And then, just as the evening was winding down, a man walked into the ballroom. He was in his 60s, gray-haired, distinguished, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He looked around the room like he was looking for someone, and when his eyes landed on my mother, he started walking directly toward her. I watched what happened next from my seat. My mother saw him approaching, and her face went absolutely white. She actually stumbled backward, reaching for a chair to steady herself. The man said something to her that I couldn't hear from where I was sitting, but I could read her lips. "Hello, Catherine. It's been a long time." And then my mother screamed. It was the kind of scream that made everyone stop what they were doing and look around in panic. It was the kind of scream that made people think something terrible was happening. This man was Victor Sterling, Rebecca's father, and what he had to say about my mother would expose a secret that had been buried for 35 years. You see, Catherine Montgomery and Victor Sterling had had an affair back in 1989 when my father was traveling for work and Victor was married to his first wife. The affair had lasted almost 2 years, and it had resulted in a child, a daughter who Victor had raised as his own, even though he knew the truth. Rebecca Sterling, my new sister-in-law, was actually my biological sister. She was my mother's illegitimate daughter. My father didn't know. Christopher didn't know. Jennifer didn't know. But Victor Sterling knew, and he had come to the wedding, and when he saw my mother, he decided it was finally time to set things right. He walked right up to her and said, "I think it's time everyone knew the truth about who Rebecca really is. I think it's time everyone knew what kind of woman Catherine Montgomery really is." The screaming that followed was absolutely unreal. My mother collapsed into a chair, and my father came rushing over, and suddenly there were lawyers and doctors and family members all converging on this one spot in the middle of the dance floor. The guests were filming everything on their phones. The servers were whispering, and I sat at my table, sipping my champagne, watching my mother's perfect world crumble exactly the way mine had been crumbling for years. Within 2 hours, my father had called for a car and taken my mother home. Christopher and Rebecca left the ballroom in separate cars. The party essentially ended. People were talking about nothing but the scandal. By the next morning, it was all over social media. The prestigious Montgomery family, the ones who had been so concerned about appearances, were now the subject of intense public scrutiny. Reporters were calling. Family friends were pulling away. The invitations to charity galas were quietly being rescinded. My mother's precious social standing had evaporated in one evening. And my father, who had always been so distant and cold, suddenly wanted to be very involved in my life. He called me the day after the wedding and asked to meet with me. We went to lunch at a quiet restaurant in the city, and he looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. "I'm sorry," he said. Those were the first genuine words he had said to me in years. For all of it. For not protecting you from her. For not standing up to her. For making you feel like you weren't good enough. I didn't know what to say. I had spent my entire adult life trying to prove myself to this man, trying to earn his respect and his love, and he was just now apologizing for the fact that I had never had it in the first place. "I need you to know something," he continued. "I didn't know about your mother and Victor. I suspected something was wrong in our marriage during those years, but I didn't know the extent of it. And what she did to you at the wedding, trying to take your penthouse, trying to force you into something you didn't want to do, that was completely unacceptable." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I want to make things right," he said. "And because I'm going to be honest with you. Your mother and I are separating. I have already spoken to my lawyers. I will be ensuring that you are taken care of financially, and I want to help you in any way I can." I felt something shift inside me in that moment. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. It was more like a weight being lifted. I had spent so long trying to get my father's approval that I hadn't realized how much that need was holding me back. "I don't need your money," I told him. "But I appreciate the apology. And I think you should focus on figuring out what you want for your own life, not on trying to fix what's broken between you and me." What happened after that was almost like watching a chess match play out in slow motion. My mother, desperate to salvage her reputation, tried to minimize the scandal by suggesting that Victor Sterling was lying, that he was making up stories to damage the Montgomery name because of some old grudge. But Victor had documentation. He had letters that my mother had written to him. He had proof of the affair. And most importantly, he had a very public platform because Rebecca Sterling, now Rebecca Sterling Montgomery, decided to speak out about her own experience of learning that her father's longtime mistress was her biological mother. Rebecca did interviews. She spoke at a benefit for family mental health awareness. She was incredibly honest and vulnerable about the impact of growing up without knowing the truth about her origins. She also, very strategically, mentioned that she had no idea her family was capable of the kind of financial manipulation and coercion that had allegedly been attempted at her own wedding. The implication was clear. This was not a good family. These were not good people. And suddenly, everyone who had ever wanted to cut ties with the Montgomerys had permission to do so without feeling rude about it. My mother tried to salvage things. She released a statement saying that she was going to step back from public life and focus on her mental health. She hired a public relations firm. She tried to control the narrative. But the narrative had already escaped her control. The story was too juicy, the hypocrisy too obvious, the fall from grace too dramatic for people to lose interest. My mother went from being one of the most celebrated women in Connecticut society to being someone who people felt uncomfortable inviting to things. The country club quietly suggested that maybe she should step back from her board positions. The charity boards that she had chaired for decades suddenly found new leadership. Her friends either disappeared or became much less friendly. She was still rich, still powerful in a legal sense, but her social power had completely evaporated. And what fascinated me was how much that bothered her. She had always told us that money and status were the most important things in the world. But when she lost her status, money suddenly seemed worthless to her. She became obsessed with trying to get people to forgive her, to accept her, to validate her again. It was pathetic, honestly. It was the most human I had ever seen her, and also the least sympathetic I had ever felt toward her. A few months after the wedding, I went back to work and threw myself into my job. I was promoted to senior vice president, which meant I was essentially running the entire division. I was more successful than I had ever been. But something had changed in me. I was no longer working to prove anything to anyone else. I was working because I loved the work, because I was good at it, because it brought me fulfillment. That was a new feeling. My relationship with my father improved slightly. We started having lunch occasionally, not because we were trying to rebuild years of neglect, but because we could now have conversations that weren't weighted with expectation and judgment. He seemed like a different person, lighter somehow, now that he wasn't married to my mother. Eventually, he married a woman named Patricia who ran her own art gallery, and they seemed genuinely happy together. They didn't try to control each other. They didn't compete. They just existed together peacefully. My brother Christopher and Rebecca's marriage actually thrived after the scandal. It turns out that shared trauma is a powerful bonding agent. They both went to therapy, both worked through their feelings about their respective families, and came out the other side stronger. They had a baby, and they didn't name her after anyone in either family, and they were very intentional about raising her without the kind of pressure and expectation that had defined their own childhoods. Jennifer, my younger sister, called me a few weeks after the wedding to check on me. She had heard what happened, had seen it all over social media, and was genuinely concerned about my well-being. "Are you okay?" she asked me. "Honestly," I said, "I don't know yet. Ask me in a year." A year later, I could tell her that yes, I was okay. Better than okay. I was free. I was free from the need to prove myself to people who would never accept me. I was free from the pressure of representing some fictional perfect family image. I was free from the expectation that my worth was determined by my accomplishments. I kept the penthouse. I paid for it with my own money, and I got to keep it. I threw a party in that penthouse, and I invited everyone who loved me, not everyone who was obligated to pretend to love me because we shared DNA or social connections. The guests were smaller in number than a Montgomery family event, but infinitely warmer. These were people who actually cared about me. These were people who had chosen to be in my life. And it was the best party I had ever been to. My mother contacted me a few times, asking to see me, to talk to me, to try to repair our relationship. I said no. Not because I was holding a grudge, but because I realized that there was nothing to repair. Our relationship was built on a foundation of control and disappointment, and I wasn't interested in rebuilding on that same foundation. Eventually, she stopped asking. She divorced my father, moved to a smaller house in Newport, and faded from public view. I heard through the family grapevine that she had become involved in various charity boards and volunteer positions, which made me wonder if maybe she was actually trying to become a better person, or if she was just trying to polish her image again. I decided that it didn't matter. Her journey was her own, and I had wasted enough of my life trying to influence her opinion of me. The real revenge, the true victory, wasn't in publicly humiliating my mother or exposing her secrets. It was in living a life that was completely and totally my own. It was in choosing happiness over status, authenticity over appearance, love over obligation. It was in looking in the mirror and seeing someone I actually respected and admired, rather than someone desperately trying to live up to impossible standards. So, if you're sitting here listening to my story, and you're thinking about the people in your life who have made you feel small or not good enough, I want to tell you something. Their opinion of you says absolutely nothing about your value. The only opinion that matters is your own. And once you realize that, Once you actually internalize that and start living your life for yourself instead of for the validation of others, you're going to discover freedoms and joys that you never even knew existed. I am infinitely grateful to my mother for slapping me at that wedding, not because the slap itself was good, but because it showed me who she really was. It gave me permission to stop trying so hard to earn her love. It freed me from a cage I didn't even realize I was living in. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, if you found yourself seeing your own family dynamics in what I've shared, please leave a comment. Tell me about your family. Tell me about the moment you decided to stop trying to please people who would never be pleased. Let's build a community of people who are brave enough to live their own lives. Subscribe to Olive Revenge Stories and never miss another story about the power of choosing yourself. I read every single comment, and I genuinely love hearing from each of you. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, your worth is not determined by anyone else's opinion of you. You are enough, exactly as you are. Thank you.